Hi folk, I want to continue with our series on hearing God. It's crucial we hear Him today. Someone said that yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, and today is a gift. We need to hear God. If someone knows your future, I'm sure you'd want to hear from that person. In fact, John 10:27 attests to that. Jesus said this, He said, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." When does God speak? You've heard me say that. When does God speak? I believe when we most need to hear His voice. And God speaks in different ways, but primarily He speaks through the Scriptures. Just briefly, just want to draw a parallel from 1 Kings 19, verse 9 to 13. And it's the story of Elijah. Elijah's just fought a major battle against Jezebel. He's hiding in a cave in isolation for 24 hours, feeling sorry for himself. And the Lord passes by Elijah, and in his wake, in God's wake, is this incredible wind. Rocks are smashed. There's an earthquake followed by a fire. And the Lord speaks to Elijah and says, "I'm not in the dramatic, Elijah. My voice comes as a still, small voice." So the children of Israel, it says in 1 Kings 19, it says that they were influenced by Jezebel and tore down the altars. Now, altars speak of prayer. You know, coming out of COVID-19, there'll be an onslaught on what is important to the believer, and that's simply prayer. You know, those of us that have kids, the excuse you give your kids for not praying privately or corporately in the local church is the same excuse. It'll be like living in an echo chamber. It'll be the same excuse that they give you when they grow up. So prayer is primary on hearing God. God speaks, as I said, through His Word. Romans 10:17 says, "Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word." God speaks, as He said to Elijah, in a still small voice, because He doesn't want to intimidate us. It's the voice of the most loving Father. It's a tender voice. Even when warning us, He'll speak in the still small voice, as opposed to hearing from the enemy. That voice will bring fear, intimidation, condemnation, and even accusation. And that's found in Revelation 12:10. You know, when you hear accusation in people's voice, that accusation is straight from the pit of hell. So how else can I be assured of it's God's voice? That's a very good question. Well, when we hear from God, His voice, what God says, will always agree with Scripture, never violate Scripture. He'll never tell you to do something that's sinful. It'll always be consistent with His character and nature. The fruits of the Spirit attest to that. God's voice will always be consistent. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And we find that in Hebrews 13, verse 8. God can speak to us through visions and dreams. We find that in Acts 2:17. And this next scripture, I absolutely love it. It's in Colossians 3:15. It speaks through Him bringing His peace to our hearts. Paul says this to the Colossian church. He says, "Let the peace of God rule in your hearts." That word rule in the Greek comes from the word umpire in English. And allowing, in other words, Paul saying to these people, to these believers, allow the peace of God to umpire the decisions you take in your life. Another way God speaks as well is found in Revelation 3:7, through circumstances, open and closed doors. He also speaks through people. Proverbs 11:14 says, "In the multitude of advisors there is safety." Make sure that that person that you're listening to is mature and that they connected to the local body. Remember what Paul said to the Greeks in 1 Corinthians 12:21. He said, the eye can't say to the hand, "I don't need you." They have to be connected. if you actually want to hear from God, you need to hear from someone that's connected to the local body, because if there's no connection to the local church, they're not fulfilling the function that God's called them to have. You see, if the eye's connected to the optic nerve, listen carefully, I can see, but if I don't connect it to the muscles, i.e. the rest of the body, I can only see in one direction, and I'm limited to having peripheral vision only. Peripheral simply means relatively minor, irrelevant, or superficial. We want to hear from God in this hour. Let's hear from mature people, folk. Lastly, things that will stop us hearing God are things simply like unbelief and disobedience. You see, delayed obedience is disobedience. Hebrews 11:6 reminds us, but without faith it's impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that God is, and he's a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. Folk, in this hour we need to value the voice of God. Remember, it's the still small voice. Let not your heart be troubled. God bless.